Bison Media Zone on WDAY Extra.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of the Bison Media Zone on WDAY Extra with the Forum's Jeff Kolpak. I'm Dom Izzo. Semifinal Saturday almost here. North Dakota State and South Dakota State playing 11 a.m. inside Gate City Bank Field at the Fargo Dome for a trip to Frisco, Texas, and the national championship game at stake. It's an even-numbered year, so it seems fitting the Bison and the Jacks would play in the playoffs. It's happened every time.
Who cares about that game? Let's talk about the news of the day, the Ivy League going into the FCS playoffs. Who cares about a semifinal game?
I'll get to the Ivies. We'll do that in our next segment because that's
exciting.
We've been pining for that.
As long as we're stuck in FCS here.
Yes, we are.
Yes.
So give us a little juice on that. But this is, if there's 2 games a year that the Bison fans get juiced about, Jeffrey, this is one of them. And I think the head coach was a bit excited during his press conference yesterday.
But he's always kind of excited. That's the way he rolls when talking to those players yesterday. It's maybe a little more than usual. I get that. But the fans, they have spoken. They have spoken on what's important in the FCS playoffs. You know, the second round, quarterfinals, It's a result of so many playoff games over so many years now, over a decade. You're talking about, 47, 48 playoff games in that span. I just think the fans are like, let's just do one game in December, and it's going to be the semifinals because odds are they're going to make it. There's 4 or 5 teams that can make it that far generally in the FCS. Will the Ivies make it?
We'll see.
Probably not.
I'm curious to see how they built that up. But we disagreed on this on Monday. I'm coming more to your line of thinking on the environment for the game. It's worth, I don't know how many points it's worth, at least 3 on what the environment can be and how that can affect South Dakota State.
Well, I think it's worth 6 or 7 to most teams in the FCS, especially new teams coming here. But with South Dakota State having been here so often, Mark Gronowski haven't been here so often, knows how to handle the crowd. It's probably, you're right, more like 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 at the most.
They were rattled though in that game in October.
Well,
they had a lot of penalties in that game.
Yeah, and the crowd will make a difference because when you have to make an audible, I mean, if you can't hear it, that's a problem.
Correct.
So,
I'm interested on this for Cam Miller, 4th semifinal game. I did some stats on this. We're going to talk more about it on Bison Game Day, Jeff. 20 of 53, 327 yards, and 3 touchdowns in the 3 semifinal games. Of course, he had the one game against Incarnate Word where he completed 1 pass. By far, he is going to need his best game here for the Bison.
In the semifinals, yes. So there's no question. And I think the run game might be in play like it was on this play. Yeah, those stats are just – but that's, that Incarnate – he was a different quarterback after that semifinal game against Incarnate Word. And he admitted, he just couldn't even throw the ball. It was like Steve Sachs, or who was a guy
Chuck Knobloch couldn't do it.
Yeah, who was a guy who couldn't – Chuck Knobloch.
Sachs couldn't do it either.
Yeah. Throwing from second to first, it was the same thing. It was – it's just he's a senior. He's a 5th-year guy. I think he can throw those previous stats out the window just because of the accuracy he's had since that Incarnate Word game.
He mentioned last year that setting in Missoula, loudest he's ever been in, and he said it affected him. So I guess it goes back to our first point of what we're talking about because he was not great until late in that game when he had to be, the 4th quarter drive to set up the game-tying touchdown. But prior to that, I think he completed 9 passes in the loss last year at Montana.
So I'm interested. South Dakota State's 5th in rushing defense, and really good lately.
Just awesome. They're great defense
in defending the run. So I'm just curious, does NDSU go to the pass earlier than they want to or expect to or are usually accustomed to?
So that's something
Do you try to run the ball? Because they haven't really been that great running the ball in the playoffs so far.
No, and that's something we asked Tim Polisic about in the game in October. It's like, do you regret not letting it rip earlier in the game? Because that last drive, the Bison were almost pass exclusively and went right down the field and scored that touchdown.
Yeah, and you talk about Cam Miller, you got one of the most accurate passers in NCAA history. And certainly this year and the last couple of years, take that, a couple games aside, but you got a guy who's really good and really accurate, and do you just ride that arm? And again, earlier than you're usually accustomed to, or do you try to play Bison football?
Well, I think they're going to try and establish the run. They're going to try. I'm not sure how well they're going to be able to do it. And granted, South Dakota State has Tucker Large back. He didn't play in that game in October. That's a guy on the back end of that defense that is just looking to get an interception.
Yeah, and I think the Bison took advantage of that a little bit in the first time around.
I'm intrigued as well looking at SDSU, how they've played since that game in Fargo. They've won 7 in a row. And you can say, well, Jeff, they did it. Who'd they beat after the loss? They beat USD in a game where I don't know if they were the best team on the field that night until overtime. After that, they beat Murray State, they beat UND, they beat Southern, and they beat Missouri State, and then on top of the 2 playoff wins. So I'm like, okay, competition wasn't great, but they played really well.
Yeah, and they did what NDSU has not done the last 2 weeks, and they buried them.
Yep.
They buried the competition. I mean, that game last week was just over.
It was over. It was 31-0 at halftime.
It was just over right away. And I just, Incarnate Word, and that's a team that was there before, so you think they would have known how to maybe, feel the surroundings.
That guy's going to be a factor. He was not in the game in Fargo. 18 is going to show up, and that's Large there making a play, who also didn't play in the game. Those 2 guys, I think, are going to be heard from in a big-time way in this game on Saturday.
Well, and I would expect the Gronowski would target Griffin Wilde certainly more than what he did.
Yes.
And I go back to one game was highlights UND there. UND never targeted their best player as much as they should have. Yeah. Bo Belquist. I mean, I saw first halves where it's like, give him the ball at some point. I don't know, reverses, whatever. And same thing with Griffin Wilde. I would expect that they would give this guy the ball, whether it's short screens, bubble screens, out patterns, deep balls. Everything's on the table.
Do you believe the Bison were pressing the last 2 weeks? I've had NDSU fans ask me that over the last, just that they were tight, knowing they wanted to get to this game so badly, and now it's here that maybe they'll let it loose because they have not done that the last 2 weeks.
It seems like that's not something you'd expect under a Tim Paulson coach team, but yeah, perhaps. I just never got the feeling it was all guns a-blazing here. I mean,
and Tim said, start.
Well, he said, what was it, on the second round game, he goes 27 minutes before kickoff. Yep. He goes, the guys just aren't. Yeah. He sensed something was up.
You think there's anything to it? This is the last game in this building for a Cam Miller, an Eli Mostart, a Gray Zabel, a Mason Miller, that this is it. We're going to go guns blazing on this one.
Last year thought. I mean, that to me would be a finale kind of thought. And that would probably think you're going to lose. I don't know. I just don't think that's a factor anymore. They had their senior day, and I think that was the pomp and circumstance enough for these guys. Yeah. They played so many games in this building, and you just can't go in there thinking this is it. Yeah. That's just the wrong attitude, especially in a semifinal.
Now, the Bison may get a guy back. Luke Wirtz was back practicing on Monday. Tim Polisic said it's trending that he's going to give it a go, and Wirtz had maybe his best game as a Bison in that game in October. He had 8 tackles in the win against South Dakota State. So if it's a game that's played, in the box in between the tackles, that's where Wirtz is most effective.
Yeah, I guess the one question, though, it's a back injury, and as somebody who has dealt with that over the years, I just don't know if you are totally healthy, going through a football season. That's something.
He hasn't been because he's missed chunks of games so far this year.
And so who knows? I mean, I guess game time decision. You better be fully healthy in this game. Yeah. You can't go at 75%.
It sounds like Marcus Shepard will give it a go as well, that he has not played. He started the game, but he didn't play much against Mercer
couple series
last week. It's the cornerback spot is one that's really been an issue. And Polisic, when asked about Marty Brown's toe, is like, Marty's going to go out there. He didn't think it really affected him as much as he thought last week.
Not sure that's the greatest sign either. When a toe is important.
Correct.
I mean, that's you just think it's just a little toe, but no, it's when you're plant. I mean, it's a big deal, especially on turf.
And that is the contrast here, where we talked about it on Monday. South Dakota State seems like they're healthy or getting healthier, and the Bison are not in that direction.
Well, I think it's a trend for South Dakota State in their title runs. They've largely avoided the big injury, other than Mark Gronowski's ACL in the spring season against Sam Houston, right?
Yeah, I'd say the only other part would maybe Kraft, because Kraft was bugged by injuries in 22.
But he came back.
But he came back for the back end of that season, and boy, he was – because he missed the Bison game, I remember, in 2022, the regular season game.
Yep.
But he was good the rest of the way after that.
Well, and that's football. I mean, if you're strong enough, healthy enough, and I think some of that has to do with being physically superior to your opponent. You put the hurt on them, not on you.
Give me your thoughts on a quick start in this game. What what's necessary, and how do you think this plays out?
You always say that, but I don't think it's necessarily huge. I think you just can't get down early. I mean, I don't think you need to bolt to a 14-0 lead like you did against Mercer, but I think you do have to show you're going toe-to-toe right away. And if you're the Bison, you can't get down 7-0, 14-0.
Well, I'll go back to that James Madison game, the only game they've ever lost in the playoffs in that building. It was 17-0. And James Madison was rattling the Bison. And they got that to 17-17. That place was going nuts. And then JMU scored the last 10 to win that football game. You don't want any part of falling behind by 2 scores to the Jacks.
But in that game, JMU had the much better running game, if you remember.
Yes.
And that's and they had the quarterback who was a dual threat
Ryan
quarterback.
Shore,
Yep.
I mean,
and he made some plays.
Yeah.
And so that's what it takes. You need to have some sort of running game to help keep that dome crowd quiet and not have to go to so many audibles, and you need a quarterback who can do it through the air and with his legs. And I think South Dakota State has that.
I think the 11 a.m. kickoff is a good deal for both. Just get out there and play. You know, there's no sitting around. You get up, do your warm-ups, and then you play the football game.
Well, it's not good for our pregame show because we'll be running into the dome.
We're going to be a little chilly as well.
Yes.
Need some layers. We'll take a break. We come back. We'll hit Kolpak's big topic, the breaking news today. The Ivy League is heading to the FCS playoffs, what that means for the postseason going forward, and we'll look ahead to the South Dakota-Montana State game as well. We're back on the Bison Media Zone right after this. Welcome back, everybody, here on the Bison Media Zone. This was the story from ESPN's Pete Thamel that broke about 3 hours ago, saying the Ivy League has agreed to participate in the NCAA Division I FCS playoffs starting with next year. Of course, the league had long had a tradition, Jeff, where they only play 10 games, and then they're done right before Thanksgiving. And this is a monumental shift in how they have done things for almost a century at the Ivy League.
Hallelujah, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's about FCS needed some good news because teams leaving and programs moving up and it just, who's taking their place. At least this is something.
Yep.
And we don't know how the Ivy will compete on a national level because generally in non-conference they don't. You think they'll be better than I think they will be, but I don't know, maybe this will help recruiting a little bit too, that you can play for a national title. I don't know. We'll find out. But I think it's good news. Can we trade the Citadel for Harvard next year?
I thought you were excited to go to Charleston.
Well, I kind of am for that, yeah. And Nashville's pretty good.
Well, let me throw this at you. For the presidents of these schools, at Columbia, at Harvard, and Yale, do you not think that they might, or certainly the alums who make some money at those schools, to say, hey, if we're going to compete with the Dakotas now, that we might want to get a collective going and maybe invest in some football players?
What's Harvard's endowments? It's so many billion that the government told them you got to spend it.
That's what I'm telling you.
Maybe you spend it on the collective.
Holy cow.
Wow, it's just the money is really striking on what they have. And that would be another, again, philosophical shift.
Oh, gosh,
to throw money targeted to academics, to athletics, and these schools. But is Oswego an Ivy League school? Refresh my memory.
They're definitely not.
They're not?
I can tell you that. We're not considered the Ivy of Central New York. I can tell you that. This year, Columbia, Dartmouth, and Harvard all tied for the league championship, thanks to your Harvard win over Yale, by the way, in the last game of the season. The league announced today that they'll develop tiebreakers to determine how its automatic qualifier will be awarded when there are co-champions in the future. Because
who has the highest GPA? What are you going to do?
You could do that, I guess. Yeah. Because that'll be the 11th automatic bid. So they'll take an at-large bid out of the 2025. So it'll be 11 automatic bids and 13 at-large.
Oh, I'm fine with that.
I'm okay
are you
with
not?
That too.
Yeah, because
if you're going to have a 7-5 team or a 6-6 team next year telling me they want to be in, I would gladly welcome. And then you'll ask me, okay, well, where they could be seated? Well, this year, that Dartmouth team and Harvard were ranked 20th to 25th in the poll. So I'm telling you, that's a 12 to a 16 seed in the tournament next year.
So I put a tweet out, or an X or whatever you want to call it now, on this news happening this morning. And Todd Phelps, the deputy director of NDSU, I think liked it.
Yeah.
So does that mean, Todd, you're on it? Are we scheduling?
I know I have talked to him about it in the past because he's the man who runs scheduling at NDSU. I think there would be a lot of Bison fans that would go to New York City for Columbia or Boston for Harvard or Yale.
How about Penn? I mean, College Game Day has been to Penn.
I think there would be some fans that would, for a home and home on that, absolutely. You want to get some juice in the building for a non-conference game? Sign yourself. And it would replace like a Maine or a Mercyhurst or Stonehill. You know, I was complaining about the both South Dakota schools scheduled in D2s. Go schedule one of these now. You don't have to worry about, these games count.
We'll see if they schedule back, though.
Right.
That'll be
correct.
That'll be
and that's
going
to be a scheduling philosophy change for the Ivies as well, because they have traditionally scheduled either a CAA team. Mercer played Princeton this year, or a SoCon team. Now do they branch out and come out this part of the country? I'll be really interested to see if that happens.
Well, they should. If you want to be a player, Ivies in the FCS playoffs, now you've made that commitment. Make the commitment. And you got to go, let's go 100%.
I will say there's two things. We've talked about this on past shows, that they instituted there's no more live tackling in practice, the elimination of the down to the ground live tackling, and they moved the kickoff up to the 40-yard line in league games, which resulted in an increase in touchbacks and a reduction in concussion injuries. So they've done some forward process thinking that I don't know the rest of the country has gotten behind.
Well, they'll have to get on board with the rest of the country in that regard. But it's good. Again, good news for the FCS and a subdivision that's really looking for some juice, right?
Yes, anything there.
I mean, with the 4 teams left now in the playoffs, and it's easily the most 4 identifiable schools from September on. You figured this was going to happen. Davis had an outside shot, came close, but this subdivision, it needs more.
Well, to that point, I know you're writing about this, so I don't want to give all the kitchen sink away, but the 4 schools left all share a border. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that and with the feedback you've got about why, outside of getting great players, why these are the teams left standing.
Well, then they share a border. There's actually a monument there. Did you know that? In North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana?
I did not.
Yeah, I'm doing a little
Okay,
research.
I look forward to that.
Yeah, so, but they all share a philosophy, too, and that's physical football. Again, establish the run, and I asked a couple players that, and Tim Polasek, and he thinks, well, they're bigger players here, and there's got to be some sort of recruiting advantage, too, being in this area of the country in FCS. There's not a whole lot of FBS around here.
No.
So that's got to be a factor into it. So it's not a surprise, but they all share about the same philosophy.
That other matchup is South Dakota and Montana State. South Dakota's making its FCS semifinal debut. It's going to be a crazy scene in Bozeman. This is a big challenge for Bob Nielsen's school.
Right, and Montana State, I think, is a school that's really upped its game when it comes to the FCS, and they're building an indoor facility. So that's another thing they have in common is investment in football. So all 4 have indoor football. South Dakota can go inside into its Dakota Dome to practice, but the other 3 all have indoor practice facilities, joining the likes of UND, Youngstown, Illinois State. Who's making the investments here? It's the Valley teams.
Yep. That's the separating factor now in terms of who's moving forward. I'll throw a stat at you. The last time both road semifinalists won, 2016, James Madison won here, Youngstown State won at Eastern Washington. Since then, no road semifinalist has won. The home team is 14-0 in this round over the last 7 years.
Which, again, you look at South Dakota State and NDSU, and South Dakota State's favored, but you have that stat, too.
I think there's part of that, and that's why I'll go over to that game in Bozeman. We saw the Jacks lose out there, and they ran out of steam as well. That was SDSU's 4th straight game, much like the Bison last year. That was their 4th straight week of playing when they played in Missoula. There's something to that. And that may be the case we find out with the Coyotes and the Cats on Saturday.
Yeah, but, this is South Dakota's first road game, so it's not like they've been traveling. This is South Dakota State's first road game. They've been in Brookings the whole time. You could throw that road worry because it doesn't pertain. They're just taking a bus trip up I-29.
But I would say for the Coyotes, though, first time in that kind of environment, that might be something that could get to them.
It's going to be loud there. Yeah. I'm not sure. I didn't look at the temperature forecast.
It's going to be warmer there than here, I can tell you that. No doubt about that. Don't forget, we'll be with you on Saturday morning. Bison Game Day gets us started at 10 a.m. on WDAY with Jeff, myself, Sam, and Kyle. We'll be outside. We'll see you out there in tailgating. And then, of course, Bison Jacks at 11 a.m. on WDAY. We'll see everybody on Saturday. Thanks for watching.